Good afternoon, everyone. So happy to have everyone join us for another virtual legal clinic. My name is Jelena Smallwood. I'm the Director of Parent and Family Programs, and happy to have Neighborhood Legal Services, Diane Prosky, with us to talk about public benefits as well as the benefits that are available to college students. First, we'd like to thank our virtual legal clinic partner, the Volunteer Lawyers Project, who has a hotline that's available now for families and our community members who do have questions regarding family law, divorce, unemployment, and other types of concerns that are non-criminal. So as you can see this flyer here, please jot down any numbers that may be relevant to you or those that you can share with our community. If you have questions during this session, feel free to post them in our Facebook Live comments so we can share those with Diana. And again, we want to also thank Dr. Kreiner Cash, who's the visionary for community schools and allows us to be a strategic partner in this work and bring you programs just like this. So at this time, I'd love to introduce Diana Prosky, again, staff attorney from Neighborhood Legal Services. Diana works with Niagara counties, Genesee, Wyoming, and Orleans County. She has a master's in library and information science from Kent State, did undergraduate work at UB Law Program, and spent 4 years handling workers' compensation issues, and then started with Neighborhood Legal Services in 2008. Recently, she's been handling public benefit matters, primarily for those experiencing homelessness, since starting at Neighborhood Legal Services. So at this time, I would be happy to share Diana Prosky with you and all the resources that she has available.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here and to be able to share this information. We've been trying to get some information about student eligibility, particularly out to parents and community members for a while. So thanks again. So this is our contact information just for a brief overview of Neighborhood Legal Services. We are another civil legal services provider in Western New York. We serve the counties that Jelena mentioned. I work in the Buffalo office, which is the largest office, and most of what I'm going to talk about today, the laws pertain to the full state. The procedures, though, vary from one county to another, and so any procedures and locations that I talk about are going to be in Erie County. Our services are free. As long as you fit in the income eligibility guidelines for most of our programs. Some of our programs don't have those guidelines, so you should call to find out whether we can assist you. We practice in the areas of family law, disability law, landlord-tenant law for our housing unit, and the public benefits unit where I work. We do not handle any criminal cases, just to keep that in mind. And the contact information is on the front page here. So if you have questions about whether you need our help or whether you can get assistance, please feel free to give us a call and to check out our website. A lot of what I'm talking about today, there's some of that information on our website. So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. So most people don't realize that you have certain rights when you apply for public benefits. You have the right to apply no matter what. I can apply, anyone can apply, and your application has to be processed and you should get a decision. Everyone has the right to ask for help getting documents or other verifications that they can't get on their own. So often people will need help getting some of that information. If you can't get it, you can ask your worker to help you. You always have a right to a written decision on your application. So you should always at some point receive a written notification saying whether your application is being approved. If so, what services are going to be provided? If not, why isn't your application being approved? And that notice is really, really important because not only does it explain what's happening and why, it also has information about your right to request fair hearings and to request conferences if you disagree with the decision. And that's a really important right to take advantage of if you feel like your case hasn't been properly handled by the Department of Social Services. At a hearing, everyone has the right to request and receive documents the agency will present. They also have the right to present their own evidence. So if you are going to a hearing, you can go, oh, yes, I see the chat. Yeah, that's why I'm here today, because many people don't know about these rights. Sorry, something came up in the chat. Saying that many people don't know about these rights, and that's true. And that's what I'm going to try to remind everyone of and make sure that you have correct information about. At the hearing, everyone has the right to present testimony and evidence. So if you have witnesses, you can present their testimony. If you have documents, you can present those documents. And then it'll be up to the judge to decide how applicable they are. And then everyone has the right to reasonable accommodations in every step of the process, from filling out the application to attending a fair hearing. And we'll talk about what reasonable accommodations are in just a second. Now, none of these rights, just so you know, have really changed during the pandemic. Some of the agency's rights are a little bit different, and some of the processes have been altered to make sure that people can access benefits without endangering public health. But you still have the same rights. So the Department of Social Services has a right to interview and investigate whether you are eligible. Usually for cash assistance, the interview must be in person. That is one of the changes during the pandemic. So during COVID, they are doing interviews by phone to as much as possible. Most interviews for SNAP are over the phone at all times. It's just cash assistance that is usually the in-person one, and emergency assistance. If you need up-to-date information, I would suggest going to the Erie County Department of Social Services website, because they have been providing a lot of the information you need so that you can be prepared to drop off your application and be ready for the phone interview to smooth things over. They have the right to ask you to verify relevant facts such as income, resources, who's in your household, and to randomly do what they call a fraud investigation or a front-end detection investigation. And that's just where they just pick random applications and verify whether some information is correct. So you could receive a letter or a card about a home visit, and you're probably, in that case, are just, if you're an applicant, they're just checking and spot checking to make sure that all the procedures are being followed. And then the agency has a right to time to process your case. The amount of time varies depending on the benefit. So what do? We investigate negative actions. So that is if you've been denied, if your benefits have been reduced, if you've been discontinued. So if that happens, you can call our office and we can look, at the information that you provide to us and see if there's anything that we can do to help. Usually the first thing we want to look at is the notice. So that's one of the reasons it's so important, because that's going to give us a lot of information about what the Department of Social Services thinks might be going on. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. So these are just some basic terms an applicant that I'm going to use. So an applicant is someone who's in the application phase. They've applied, but they don't have a decision yet. Recipient, the decision has already been made. Your application has been approved. Temporary assistance is sort of what we used to call welfare. It's the cash grant to meet your shelter, utility, and basic needs. An emergency is a need that has to be met to ensure your health and safety. So I gave some examples there, and those are pretty common ones. A reasonable accommodation is a change in the usual rules or procedures to ensure people with disabilities can access benefits and services. This is actually part of the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act, because that law applies to government services, including benefits. So if you need help getting through the application process, for example, because you have a disability, you can ask them to modify some of their usual rules in order to make sure you can get those benefits. So if, for example, you normally would need an in-person interview and you can't go down to DSS because you're homebound, in that case, then the reasonable accommodation they might make would be to come to your house and do the interview, as opposed to making you come down to the DSS office. And then a notice is a written information about your case that must be provided when the department decides what to do with your application, or that they're going to change a part of your existing case. It must provide specific information, and if it's about an existing case, it has to be provided at least 10 days before the change is made. So if you have a benefit now and they say we're changing, they send you a notice on May 1st that says we're going to discontinue your benefits on May 8th, that is not 10 days and that's not a valid notice. It doesn't happen very often, but that does happen, and it's important to make sure that it's a full 10 days. And the reason is because of the fair hearing. Yeah.
We did have one question come up from Facebook. If a person is a veteran, would you still be able to support them with navigating this process if they have never applied for benefits before? Yeah, we do provide assistance to veterans. We don't handle actual veterans benefits cases,
But if you're a veteran and you're applying for one of these other benefits, absolutely, we would assist you with that process. We can't usually help with the application, but if you get denied or if you can't get through the application process for some reason, you can contact our office and we can try to find out. Usually we need to see that the application's been denied first, just because there's nothing we can do if the agency hasn't made a decision yet, but we would look into that.
Thank you.
Sure. I think we can go to the next one. To the next slide. Oh, wait, no, we did, sorry. So an emergency, there are emergencies and then there are immediate needs. An immediate need is something that needs to be taken care of to ensure that the person's health and safety isn't at risk that day. So the simplest example is shelter. So if you have nowhere to sleep tonight and you go to the Department of Social Services, you have an immediate need for shelter. And that's important because in those cases, DSS has to interview you and has to issue a written decision the same day. They can't say, I don't think we have time to get back to your application, come back tomorrow. And they normally don't do that, just to be clear. But you are entitled to a decision the same day if it qualifies as an immediate need. So emergency assistance benefits include shelter, rent arrears, utility arrears, which is not the same as HEAP, security agreements and deposits to obtain new housing, help with moving if you need to move, help with storage if you're not able to move directly into permanent housing and you're staying somewhere temporarily, repair, replacement, and purchase of appliances depending on the circumstances, the purchase of furniture, otherwise known as a household establishment grant, and then replacement of furniture and clothing lost in a disaster. So each benefit has different rules and regulations. The first thing to remember is if you have children in your household. If you have children in your household, for most of these benefits, you're going to be eligible if you're up to 200% of the federal poverty level. If you don't have children in your household, you're normally only eligible if you're up to under 125% of the federal poverty level. But if your emergency is tied in any way to the pandemic, the 125% rule does not apply. So even if you don't have children in your household, if you have an emergency need and you're at 150% of federal poverty, you can still get assistance if the emergency is related even remotely to COVID. So think about that when you're thinking about what your emergency is, because you may very well be eligible for these benefits and not realize it. And then utility arrears, not HEAP, there is not an income limit. So anyone can apply for and potentially receive utility assistance. You should, however, always apply for HEAP first. And as far as I know, HEAP is actually still open. And there were 2 emergency HEAP benefits. So if you have not already applied for HEAP, I would really encourage you to do so because it's federal money that you never have to pay back. In some circumstances, you could have to pay emergency assistance back, but not HEAP. So they'll usually tell you when you go down, well, you should really apply for HEAP first to see if we can get that grant. And then for emergency assistance applications, generally they would make you come down, but right now they are not because of the pandemic. So you can call the emergency assistance office at 460 Main Street. There is a website on the Erie County Department of Social Services. There's a form where you can actually fill it out and they'll mail you an application. And then they have put a lot of information about the different emergency benefits that are available on their website. So if you go to ECDSS and you look at emergency assistance benefits, they will have a lot of the information you need to know how to apply. Because in some cases you might have to get estimates, in some cases you might have to use specific vendors. Most of that information and even a lot of the blank forms are available on the DSS website. And you can also fax applications once you've completed them, you can mail them. And they have a drop box on the first floor of 460 Main Street where you can leave your application and then they will call you to follow up and do your interview over the phone.
Diana, we have a couple of questions that came in that I want us to try to get to before we move to the next slide. So the first one, how old do you have to be to qualify for benefits?
So it's not really so much about your age limit as your circumstances. In the state of New York, your parents are required to take care of you financially. They're responsible for you until you're 21. So people who are 18, 19, 20 certainly can apply for benefits if they are financially independent or otherwise independent from their parents. We just make sure that they're aware that if you are applying for benefits and you receive benefits, social services could go file a claim for child support against your parents. They don't always, I don't know that they always do that. I don't even think it's required, but they can. So we just make sure that people understand that that's a potential consequence. So basically, if you're in your own household, you should apply. And if you get denied, even if you're under 21, you should give us a call. Same for students.
How does that impact teen parents under the age of 18?
So there's actually a whole separate set of budgeting rules for people who have what we call 3-generation households. So their case is most likely going to be in a separate unit anyway. And if the parenting teen is not living with their parent, then the parenting teen is eligible to get their own case, and it would be up to social services, just like any other person under 21, whether they wanted to go after the teen's parents.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, during the pandemic, are applications for cash benefits online? And I'll add, because this question came up as well, the emergency assistant application, is that online as well?
So the applications themselves are available online. You can't submit them online,
Okay.
like you can for SNAP in Erie County. We're not one of the counties that has the ability yet to do that, but you can. So there are a couple different ways you can do it. There's a fillable PDF application, so you can fill it out and then print it, and you just have to sign it, and then you can either leave it in one of the drop boxes or you can mail it for cash assistance. And then they will call you on the phone. For emergency assistance, you can mail it or fax it or drop it off at 460 Main Street in that drop box, and then they will follow up on the phone. So really what you need to do during the pandemic is make sure you have a working phone number for them, even if it's someone else's phone that you can use to complete your interview and to respond to messages. You just want to make sure they have a phone number. And if you have absolutely no phone, you can still go apply in person. We just, they prefer if you don't. And of course, we don't want anyone to be putting their health at risk.
Perfect. Thanks, Diana. That was a hot topic question that came up, and we saw a lot of hearts on Facebook Live as you responded to those. So thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think we're good. All right. So that's emergency assistance. Before we go on to cash assistance, I'll just briefly mention emergency shelter, since that's a lot of what I do. So emergency shelter, it's an emergency benefit, but it's also not an emergency benefit in a way. So the application process is a little bit different. For emergency shelter, you're going to apply at the main DSS office at 158 Pearl Street. You cannot apply ahead of time. You have to apply the day that you become homeless. So if you know that you have to leave your home on the 30th, you can't go down on the 20th. You can go down on the 29th and apply, but you're not going to get anywhere because you're not actually having that homeless emergency yet. Because they just can't predict ahead of time what shelters are going to be available. They can't predict all those things ahead of time. And if you don't have all the information they need when you initially apply, most of the time they can give you something called a pre-investigation grant. So they'll place you in a shelter, and then they will give you time to get whatever documentation they need and come back with it on another day. And then emergency shelter, the other big difference, there's no income limit the way there is for most benefits, but if you have enough money to meet your own shelter costs, so if you have enough money that they think you can pay for a motel, they can require you to go do that. Or if you have ongoing income, you may be required to contribute part of your income to the cost of your shelter. And it's not usually going to be the full amount of the shelter, and then DSS would pay the difference. It's just, a lot of people don't realize that you might be required to pay. If you are, and if you're not sure the amount is correct, you can always call us and we can take a look at it and make sure that it's correct. All right, so let's go to ongoing benefits. Ongoing temporary assistance is basically the cash welfare that, we're traditionally used to. And it is going to cover, it's divided up to cover your rent, utilities, and your basic needs. In Erie County, those applications are processed and the benefits are administered by the Erie County Department of Social Services. Adult applicants who are under 60 have to participate in an employability assessment. And then there are basically 3 outcomes. You may be unable to work because of a medical or psychiatric condition. You may be unable to work because of a substance abuse problem, in which case you are going to be required to attend substance abuse treatment, or you are able to work and will be required to participate in a job search and work program. So historically, since welfare reform in the 90s, this is where students had problems and why most students couldn't get benefits, because they couldn't do both school and the work requirement. And then parenting students couldn't, if it's not a work requirement, there's no daycare assistance for people who were just for the time that you're going to school. So if you're low income and you're parenting and you don't have childcare for your children, you wouldn't have been able to go to school because DSS also wouldn't provide childcare. So what changed in 2014 is that the state decided that school, so a 4-year college or community college, can be a work activity itself. So that's going to allow students to fulfill their work requirements and then be able to go to school at the same time. And then there are all sorts of complicated formulas about how many hours count, and the first year, different things count from the 4th year. But the main lesson is that if you have a student who is going to have to comply with work activities, either to get their own case or as part of yours as their parent, they're going to go to their employment assessment and say, school is part of my employment plan. School is what's going to lead to economic self-sufficiency. So I want you to make it part of my employment plan. Because as soon as it's a part of that employment plan, then you can go to school. The work hours are covered for by whatever combination of activities you've got going on. You are eligible for daycare if you are a parenting student. So if you go to your employment assessment and your worker says, I'm not going to count school as your work activity, you also have the right to request a hearing. I have not had any of those hearings myself, but I have seen quite a few fair hearing decisions from across the state. And the administrative law judges really will expect you to be the worker to be able to explain why they wouldn't count school. They can't just say no. They have to have a reason. And if you request a hearing, they're going to have to be able to articulate that reason to the judge. Otherwise, you can make school your work activity. And this really was a huge change that had advocates all over the state very, very excited, because we all went to school and we know how hard it can be. And and we know that there are lots and lots of people who need financial assistance to be able to go to school.
Okay. Questions about that student piece, Diana. So if a student wants their own case, but is also eligible for work study, how does that impact their eligibility for public assistance?
So for cash assistance, engaging in work study, they're going to count that income against your cash assistance case.
Okay. SNAP
is different. And so we'll talk about SNAP separately, because even the student rules are not the same. Okay. But so if you have work study, that's going to be considered part of your income once you have that work study job. So just whatever you make is going to count against any public assistance grant you receive. So what you would do is you would just report that income to your worker like you would any other part-time job, and then they'll do a budget and figure out whether you're still eligible. Because people, particularly students with children in their households, if they're also working, they're going to get a lot of that income is going to be disregarded. So they still might be eligible for some amount of cash assistance. So you just have to sort of turn in the proof that you have income, and then they'll do a budget and figure it out from there. And if you don't think the budget is right, you can call us and we can look at it.
And then does this have any impact on students' financial aid packages at school, whether it's TAP or Pell or any other loans or grants that a school may grant them?
The temporary assistance income on the student I don't think that it does count. I don't know for sure because I don't really do financial aid, but I believe it's exempt because typically student income is. It's not usually enough to really impact your financial aid package. And then in terms of temporary assistance, grants and loans, I believe, do not count against, your public assistance. So it shouldn't, your public or your student loans that you're taking out to pay your tuition should not negatively impact your public assistance case. And then in terms of a student who wants their own case, it depends on the family circumstances. So some students, once they turn 18, they can get their own case. And often what happens when people turn 18, when kids turn 18, parents just take them off the case because the kids have to either come off the case or they have to comply with work requirements. And so before school was an option to comply with work requirements, if they wanted to go to school, they just had to come off the case and that was it. Now they can go in and say, hey, I'm still part of my mom's case or my dad's case. I know I have to fulfill a work requirement. I want it to be, I want you to use school as my work activity, just like if they had their own case.
Great, thank you.
Sure. Okay. So let's talk about the actual cash assistance grant so that you know what we're talking about. So it's divided into 3 parts. Once your case has been opened, you've got all your documents, everything's good, then you're going to get a notice in the mail explaining how your budget was calculated. So what they're going to do is they're going to say you have a shelter allowance, which is really rent, utilities if they're separate from your rent, and then what they call basic needs, which is supposed to be everything else. Can you actually flip quickly to the next slide, and then we'll come back to the work activities. All right, so this is what the grants look like. So it is not very much money, but it's something. So as you can see, for a household with children, the maximum grant for 2 people is about $550, $560, and that's per month. And then you would also be eligible for your SNAP benefits. But, like I said, it's not a lot of money. It's very antiquated. But if you have no other income, or if you have, particularly, I think if you're a parent who has temporary assistance and you have a child who's going to be starting college, if you want to keep them on your case, you can do that by asking, that college be part of their work activities, and at least that way your grant won't go down. But as you can see there, these amounts haven't been updated since, for the most part, since I think the 90s or early 2000. So yeah, 100 and the bottom one is actually, there it is, the shelter allowance. You can see we're supposed, in Erie County, one person's supposed to pay $169 in rent per month. Obviously, nobody can pay that. There is no apartment for $169 in Erie County anymore. No, so for a lot of people, the entire grant ends up going toward their rent. But if it helps with your rent and allows you to go to school, then I would absolutely advocate for you to do that. All right, can we just flip back then? Okay. And then I mentioned earlier that you have work activities and substance abuse treatment. Then you have to comply with those requirements. If you don't, you can get sanctioned. If you are sanctioned, that means that you are not eligible for cash assistance. Sometimes it's just until you're willing to comply with whatever they're saying you didn't do. Most of the time, it's a time period. So the smallest time period is 45 days. The longest is 6 months. So if you get sanctioned and you're looking at 6 months without any income, that's, a serious issue, obviously, because you're also not going to be eligible for most emergency assistance benefits. So if you become homeless while you're sanctioned, you're not eligible for shelter. So you really have to keep on top of those requirements. And really the best thing to do is if for some reason you can't attend your work activity or you can't attend your substance abuse treatment program, make sure you document the reason, what was going on. If you're sick, did you go, does your doctor know? You might need a medical note explaining that you couldn't go, because unfortunately with public assistance, they don't, you can't just like miss a day. You don't just call off. You really do have to be able to document why you weren't able to attend on any particular day. So try to, keep track of that. And then mail, if you are having a problem with your mail, you can use a mailing address. They always want your home address so that they know where you live, and especially if your rent's on voucher, they know where to send the rent. But you can also have a second mailing address where they will also send copies of your mail in case you have trouble receiving your mail at your residence. You can use a friend or relative, you can use a post office box, as long as they also have a residential address or an address where you receive mail if you're homeless, then you should be able to make sure that you're getting your notices, because not getting notices is a problem, because that's usually how you know there's an issue. Okay. Then we can go to the next. So that's public assistance. SNAP is very different. SNAP benefits for most people are usually easier to get. SNAP is all federal. It's all federal funding. The workers are paid with federal money. And we, as advocates, we love this program because it brings a lot of federal money into the county. So every time you use your SNAP benefits, that little bit of money is filtering down from the worker who issued the benefits to you, down to the cashier, to the suppliers who are paying, who are bringing the groceries. So it really, I think it's over $1.80 of economic activity in this area for every dollar of food stamp or SNAP benefits that people get. So as I said, the budgeting rules for students are different. The budgeting rules are different entirely, but they really impact students differently. So whereas some benefits are calculated just based on your overall income, SNAP budget looks at your rent and your utilities compared to your income. So if you have high rent and utility costs, you are very likely to have a higher SNAP amount than somebody, say, whose utilities are included in their rent, or somebody who has a rent subsidy, because those costs are going to be budgeted differently. Students are typically not eligible by default for SNAP, but there are exceptions. One is if you receive federal work study, which someone brought up. So if federal work study is part of your financial aid, you are eligible for SNAP benefits. They'll calculate your income, but you're still eligible for some benefits, which I really wish had been a thing when I was in school. It was not. Students who are caring for children under 6 are eligible for SNAP benefits. That's an exception. Students who receive SSI because they are disabled, that's an exception, and they can receive SNAP benefits. And now, if you have temporary assistance as a student, you can get SNAP benefits. So if you go through that process of getting temporary assistance, you're also still going to be eligible for SNAP. So for SNAP, it's much easier to apply. You can actually apply online at My Benefits. So you can just go onto the website, complete your application, and then it will get transferred to the Department of Social Services, and they will call you for an interview. So again, just make sure you have a good phone number. Everybody will be screened when they apply for what's called expedited SNAP, and that basically means that you get SNAP within 5 days. So when you apply, if you have less than $100 the month you apply in income, $150 in income and $100 in liquid resources, or your monthly income and available resources are less than your shelter and utility costs, you'll be eligible for expedited SNAP. So that means that you'll get benefits. If you apply in the middle of the month, usually you'll get about a month and a half of benefits. If you apply at the end of the month, usually you'll get about a month of benefits. And then you'll get a notice telling you whether you're eligible for ongoing benefits. So for people who are really having food emergencies and don't have any income or have high rent and utilities, and they aren't going to get any, they don't have enough money for food, they'll be screened for expedited SNAP and get those quickly. Okay.
We had 2 questions that I think is partly related to this conversation and the one that just ended, and I may unmute our 2 individuals who are in the Zoom who asked these. So the first one was, what impact will a mother receiving services have on the father of her children? Isaiah, can you elaborate just a little bit?
Yes, hello. So what I mean is a mother, so say 2 students or 2 young people have a child, and the mother does enroll in services and she receives those services. What impact does that have on the father?
Okay, so it's going to depend. First, it's going to depend on whether you're living together, whether you're together. Because if you're together, then the child, what they call the child sort of in common, it's a weird phrase, but that's what they say. So if you have the child in common and you're living together, then they're going to make the dad also apply, and they're going to include everybody's income to determine whether you're eligible for the different benefits. If you are separated, then what will happen is the mom will apply for whatever services are needed for her, assuming she has custody or has the baby. She's going to apply for herself and the child. And then DSS has the option of pursuing child support against the non-custodial parent, in this case, the dad. Now, they may or may not pursue child support. Honestly, in Erie County, I think that they almost always do. But basically what happens is the mom assigns her right to child support to the county, and then the county handles it from there. And then if the county receives child support from the non-custodial parent, or the dad in this case, some of the money, the mom will get to keep some of it, and the county will keep the rest to sort of make up for the costs of the temporary assistance benefits that are being provided to the mom and the baby. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then, yes, thank you. And then there's a similar impact if the mom would apply for Medicaid as well, right?
Yeah. Yeah, there's also an assignment of child support for Medicaid. I mean, if you've already worked out child support, as long as that's disclosed to the worker, then there are ways to figure out, you know, whether the mom would be better off applying for cash assistance, since she would get to keep part of that child support. But yeah, if the mom doesn't have child support in place already, or you haven't come to an agreement, then yeah, DSS will petition in family court for child support.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That was a good question. Was that the only question, or was there another?
Nope, there's another. Okay. We got a few that's in the queue. I'm trying to keep them related to the conversation taking place. So, and I may unmute Mrs. Collins to elaborate a little bit on this one. But her question is, are mothers of newborns required to participate in a work requirement if they're applying for benefits for the first time? Mrs. Collins, do I have that correct?
Yes, you do. You have it exactly correct.
Okay, perfect.
I don't remember the exact point after the birth of the child that the mom is required to participate in work activities. At some point, she will be called in and, you know, assessed for a work assignment after she's given birth, but there's definitely time when she can't be required to work. And then if she is going to be assigned to a work activity or is going to go back to school, the other reason they would call her in is to make sure that they can help her get daycare in place. Because if you have a child and you're being required to participate in a work activity to receive temporary assistance, you're guaranteed daycare costs. So they will cover the daycare. And they actually, from what I understand, starting in July in Erie County, they are also going to start covering daycare costs for non-traditional shifts. So a parent who works overnight, and maybe before they couldn't get daycare during the day because their work hours were at night and the daycare had to match the work schedule. Now they will be able to get a little bit more help so they can rest during the day and they can take the kids to the daycare if daycares are open, and then rest during the day. I think probably a lot of that has to do with medical staff who have to work, and emergency staff who have to work overnights and needed daycare for their kids during the day so that they could sleep. Does that answer your question, Ms. Collins?
It does. It helps a lot, but just since you gave some information, a follow-up question would be for daycare, does it have to be a qualified daycare, or will they pay for perhaps other relatives to watch the child?
They can pay for other relatives or a traditional daycare. They can do either, and they do that. Now, if you are providing daycare assistance for a family member or a family friend's child, be prepared for a delay because sometimes it takes a while to get paid, but they do pay, and they can pay you, you know, if you want to watch your grandchild while your daughter participates in her work activities and goes to college, then yeah, they can pay for that.
Awesome.
And
Thank you.
they do that a lot, actually, because there are a lot of people who, you know, want to have friends or relatives watch their kids.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Collins and Isaiah, for those. Thanks, Diana. That was great. And just to recap really quick, so this new allowance for individuals who have non-traditional work schedules to get daycare assistance will start in July. Is that just Erie County, or is that going to be nationwide?
Well, so it's a county by county option that the county can select to participate in through the state. So the state has always allowed any county that wants to provide that. Our county just hasn't in the past, and it's going to start. So you have to check with your county to find out whether that's an option that they've chosen to provide. We're just very excited in Erie County that we're going to have it.
Yes.
And we're very appreciative to social services for moving in that direction, because daycare, they understand daycare is a very big issue.
Thanks, Diana.
Sure. Okay, so we were talking about SNAP. Okay. So like I said, full-time students are usually not eligible for SNAP unless they fit into one of the exceptions. And then these are the most common ones, which are what I already talked about. People who are caring for children under 6, work study as part of financial aid, students, and students who receive SSI or temporary assistance are going to get it, can get SNAP by nature of those cases. Now, again, the 21-year-old age limit applies. So if your parents have SNAP and you're in school, then you're probably you're gonna stay as part of your parents' case, but you're not gonna have to worry about work activities or about being cut off solely because you're a student if you can make school your work activity and continue to get temporary assistance. And then I will say you can combine those exceptions. I've seen people who, for example, if you have a 2-parent household and they're both students, maybe one parent uses the child under 6 exception and another parent would receive the financial aid, for example, exception. So then the whole household would still be eligible for SNAP under those circumstances. So you can sort of combine them to try to maximize your benefits. And if you are, the other thing with students is if you do not purchase and prepare food with the other members of your household, so if you have like 2 adult roommates and maybe one of them is getting temporary assistance and food stamps, if they purchase and prepare their food separately from their roommate, they don't have to worry about being on the same case or the roommate's income counting or anything like that. The household composition has a lot to do with who purchases and prepares the food together. And you get more from 2 independent SNAP cases than you do from one household of 2 gets less than 2 individual adults would get.
We had another great question come up regarding the student benefits. So if the parent lives in New York State, the student was a New York State resident, but now attends college out of state, how does that work? Did I word that the correct way, Mercy? Yeah, okay. Yes.
So I think if a student leaves the state to go to school, they probably would have to be taken out of the case for both SNAP and cash assistance, because they're not going to be eligible for New York benefits if they don't live in New York. They can go back, you can go in and out of the household. So if you leave New York for the school year, but you come back to Buffalo for the summer, then you might be able to put the child back on the case for the summer. But once they leave the state, I think probably you're going to have a residency problem, because even though SNAP is a federal program, the states administer them independently. So for SNAP benefits, they're going to say you don't really live here. This other state should be figuring out whether you're eligible for SNAP and paying. So if they're, I would say out of state, they're probably going to have to come off the case.
Thank you.
I'm just guessing, but I think that's correct.
Okay. It sounds like that would make the most sense. I know, of course, I'm not the expert, but just thinking of even how TAP works. If that's New York State TAP, so when you relocate to an out-of-state school, you don't receive that benefit. Those were all the questions that we had come up in our Facebook Live as well as the Zoom chat. I'll do a last, oh, nope, we got some more coming in. I knew as that happened, we have a couple more. So Isaiah, is there any conversations taking place behind the scenes regarding reform to the current system of child support?
I don't know. I do not practice family law, and I'm not, so I just really don't know. There very well could be. I would probably only know about it if it had something to do, with how benefits are being issued and how social services districts are handling the assignment of child support. So I'm really sorry. I just don't know. I mean, I do know that if you feel you can't afford your child support, you can always petition for a downward modification. And we do handle some child support issues. So you could call our office and you would be able to, they would at least look at your case and see if there's anything they can do. Because unfortunately in family court child support cases, you can't get assigned counsel, so you have to find another attorney who can help you with them. And there's also the VLP Family Court Help Desk. We actually refer people to that all the time. So if you are going to be filing your own petition and you're just looking for information, about how to do it correctly, the VLP agency runs a family court help desk, and they are really, really very helpful.
Yes, and I'll also add.
Oh, raising rent allowances. We saw that. Okay, so yeah, the rent allowances are kind of a nightmare. And my office does not lobby, and we're not allowed to. So I want to be clear about that. There has been an initiative over the past several years called the Home Stability Support Initiative. And what the idea is that they would expand the downstate rent supplements that people get all over the state to some populations. So downstate, they have a program where, because housing has always been so much more expensive than the shelter allowance, you could apply for a separate supplement to apply to your rent so that you would be able to find affordable and appropriate housing. We don't have that in the rest of the state. The counties can request it on their own, but Erie County has not done so. And then the idea would be that people who are in certain circumstances, most likely it would be, I think it was people experiencing homelessness or facing homelessness, would be able to apply for this supplement everywhere else in the state, because our rents are also now well in excess of the shelter allowances. It was passed last year. I think the governor vetoed it. And I think that if you want more information about that, Push Buffalo does a lot of work on that issue, and you could probably get in touch with them to get more information. But unfortunately, I don't see them raising the standard of need, honestly, because that's just going to make because it's based on income, it's going to make more people eligible who weren't before.
Thanks, Diana. So I'm slowly going to say, I think that was our last question. I don't see any others in the Facebook Live. Just another reminder, if you do have questions after this session, that this stream will still be available on the Buffalo Public Community Schools Facebook page, as well as the link will be loaded to the Say Yes Buffalo YouTube account. This is a flyer for free legal advice through the Volunteer Legal Center project. So please feel free to jot these numbers down and share with community members and others who may have questions about all the information that Diana shared today, as well as neighborhood legal services. And I'll go back to their flyer as well, so you have their contact information. I know I took a lot of notes about things that I just had absolutely no idea about. So we may have to have you come back, Diana, when we host another a virtual college tour for our students, as well.
I'd be happy to.
As
and just
well.
so I forgot to mention, we also have offices in Niagara Falls and Batavia.
Oh, that's even better.
And then we have health insurance navigators. So if you are having trouble getting health insurance, you can call our office and ask to speak with the navigator. And the navigators cover a lot more territory than I typically would. So most Western New York counties, you should be able to get in touch with a navigator if you need it.
Great. A couple of last points, Diana. Can we share this PowerPoint for those that want to be able to? We have some of our team members that work with our preventive families, and I think this was really valuable information that they could share with those families as well. So are we okay to share this PowerPoint with them?
Yep.
And just a couple of last notes that I think were really valuable. Emergency assistance is still available, so you can go online to pull those applications, but you cannot submit the application online. That is only for SNAP. Students can use their school as a work opportunity to be able to apply for benefits, which is super, super, super exciting because it's such, there's many needs students have, and you know, food is always a need and housing is always a need. And so if they can focus more in school and not have to stretch themselves and work, especially right now, I think that's a huge benefit. Again, Neighborhood Legal Services is available and has offices in our First Spring suburbs. And we also still have the hotline with the Volunteer Lawyers Project. So again, thank you so much, Diana, for coming and sharing all this valuable information with us. Let's see. Oh, we have another comment that popped up. I'm going to log off now to have another meeting, but thanks again, VOP team. This was amazing information. This is great. Thank you so much, Diana. And we look forward to having more sessions like this with our community. So for those of you that are joining with us now and have other topics that we could possibly bring to you through the Volunteer Lawyers Project, please let us know, because we want to make sure we're providing valuable information, not just during the COVID-19 shelter in place, the pause, the pandemic, whatever you term it, but just in general, because there's resources for everyone and these valuable resources are needed. So thanks again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.